welcome everyone to SolidusConf. I figured since we were remote here, a lot of people have been working remote these days. I would give you all the full remote experience and give this talk from my couch with the dog beside me and everything. Thought I'd make it authentic. So before I dive into my talk, I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming out. Especially everyone who's on the West Coast like me, because it's 6:27 a.m. right now, and the sun is not yet up. Conveniently, the construction site across the street is still quiet, so let's hope it stays that way. It has been a very unique couple of years, and I'm really hoping that for our next SolidusConf, we're able to all see each other again in person. With the world the way it is, digital commerce has become more important than ever. We've seen businesses pouring a ton into their e-commerce capabilities. It's been really exciting to see what everyone has been doing with Solidus over the last couple of years. My hope is that everyone here gets to come away from this conference energized with new ideas about how they want to use Solidus and how we can continue to move the platform forward together. So if you're unfamiliar with me, Thomas touched on most of this, but I'm Jared. I'm on the Solidus core team as well as the stakeholders team. I've been involved in the project in some capacity or another since before it had a name back at StemBolt. Today, I run Supergood. We're a company where we build Solidus stores, maintain them, and help organizations leverage the platform. Through that journey with Solidus, I've seen the outcome of just like a ton of decisions around how to develop and use and integrate with Solidus. So when I came up with the idea for this talk, I thought people would want to know like how to really mess up Solidus stores, how to do the worst job you could possibly do and completely fail. But as I got more feedback on the talk, it seemed like people wanted to succeed at running their stores. So I kind of reframed these as like things you should do if you want to make the most of the platform. But if you came here to learn how to fail, all you need to do is just do the opposite of all these things. It's pretty straightforward. So we should be able to cover both groups. So your first opportunity to set yourself up for success with Solidus is to make sure it's a good fit for your organization. This next bit is going to sound like a little bit of a Solidus sales pitch, which is kind of funny since I know pretty much everyone here is already using Solidus, but bear with me for a second. Solidus works wonders if it's the tool you need. High volume stores benefit from the scalability, lack of fees. Stores with large catalogs can build custom tooling for bulk product management. The platform can be extended with almost any payment gateway. So if you're using something new that's not supported or something unusual or niche for your particular space, you'll be able to leverage the tools for integrating just about any payment gateway with Solidus. Marketplaces and multi-vendor stores can leverage the permissions and roles systems. So you can build out an access model that makes sense for your particular use case for who needs to access different parts of the admin and different resources and segment those groups appropriately. Because it's not tied to any particular payment platform or hosting service, and you can add custom restrictions and verification, those kinds of things. Restricted goods find themselves totally at home here on Solidus, and we've seen that with the popularity of nicotine and cannabis products on the platform. This one, the perpetual shot at Shopify and the other hosted platforms, but Solidus's checkout is fully customizable. You can add steps, remove steps, style it however you want. You can put upsells right in the checkout. You can do just about anything. There's not really a limit there. So if you want the control to experiment with that part of your platform, there's probably not a better platform for you. And finally, these last two tickets or bullets, unlike many other platforms, Solidus gives you full access to modify really any part of the system. So whether you're integrating a third party or building out a custom experience for your customers, there's really a lot to be said for being able to customize the platform itself rather than just build on top of it. So if one or more of these benefits appeals to you, Solidus is probably a great fit for your organization. If you don't need at least one of those capabilities, maybe Solidus isn't right for you. Everything in software is a trade-off. While you might think me a Solidus evangelist, having been involved in the platform since it existed, and have no intention of going anywhere. The reality is that small stores that don't need any customization, that just want to set up a store and move on, might not be the best fit for the platform. The list on the previous slide certainly wasn't exhaustive. There are tons of reasons to choose Solidus. Just make sure that you're choosing Solidus for a reason, not because you saw me tweeting about how great it is and you really liked my grumpy looking profile picture. So let's assume you've determined that one or more of the benefits of the platform appeals to your organization. Next up is figuring out what you need for launch. Now, my talk at the last conference was about how Solidus is uniquely geared for lean, agile development processes. I'm not going to retread all of that, but I want to touch on some of the important points over the course of this talk. Prior to launching your site, when you're first building it, work first on the things that absolutely need to get done before launch. Connect to the services you have to connect to, sort out your payments, your product catalog, and use what Solidus gives you. The thing you want to remember is that fresh out of the box, Solidus is a working e-commerce site. Sometimes this gets lost. People start building their grand vision for their storefront piece by piece, not realizing that half-finished component here and then the half-finished component there represent work that you actually need to do before you launch, because you can often launch without things, but you can't launch with broken things. With your must-have functionality in place, build incrementally until your organization is satisfied with the site and ready to launch. I know agile planning can be tricky, figuring out how you're going to slice features and functionality to deliver them incrementally, but here's the reality. The only reason you should be unable to launch your store on any given day should be that there's functionality the organization wants or needs that isn't built yet. If you're breaking existing functions of your store as you build, you're doing it wrong. So if your stakeholders come to you and say, we've signed this huge deal with Disney and we need the site live tomorrow, we're going to lose out on $1 million in sales, you might find yourself in a position to say that you are going to need the warehouse to fulfill orders manually because you haven't built out the connection there yet. But you shouldn't be telling them that your custom checkout is half built and the core funnel won't be functional for a couple of weeks. So there is always cool stuff happening in the web and e-commerce spaces, but just be wary of unproven technologies. Most e-commerce organizations don't actually want the technical burden of bleeding edge tech. That's sort of one of the great things about Spree and Solidus. They've been around for a long time now. They're proven. Small organizations can use them. Big organizations can use them. They do work and they do scale. We adopted a store at some point where the previous developers had used 5 different front-end JavaScript frameworks. And I can't even complain. It was different people adding their preferred frameworks. There were features that were built half using Vue.js and half using something that none of us had ever heard of, which is weird because I try and keep up with these things. E-commerce stores tend to be relatively long-lived applications. Someone is going to be maintaining your tech choices down the road. Be nice to those future maintainers, and not just because they might be me, but they might be you too. You really need to consider your organization, its trajectory, but far more important is what resources you have right now. If your org doesn't have mature dev and ops teams, then you really shouldn't be building a GraphQL gateway to proxy requests to a bunch of separate services, including a Solidus app, putting the latest hot JavaScript framework in front of that, all just to power a privacy policy page. It's overkill. There are 8- and 9-figure stores out there doing fine without the burden of maintaining all kinds of unnecessary infrastructure. And the reality is it's e-commerce. like your business might be a little special because you found the need to use Solidus, but it's not that special. You're not a tech startup. Next is don't fight Rails. It's the convention over configuration framework. Follow the conventions. It's hard enough hiring talented developers in this competitive market. Don't make it needlessly difficult for them to get oriented in your project once they come on. This is the kind of pain that you don't see until your team grows, sees significant turnover, or the project changes hands. And we've seen all of those cases lots of times. And we are very aware of that pain. Do your organization a favor and make those kinds of changes in the org as painless as possible. If you're scaling up, you've already got enough things to worry about. You get a lot for free with Rails, so just don't waste it. Next, let's talk about extensions. So while you can technically do this because there's now a default payment provider and everything, you don't normally just install Solidus and then launch your store. You could, but you don't normally do that. Besides your payment platform, you're probably going to need something on the shipping side of things, maybe a connection to your warehouse or accounting software, potentially help desk or customer service integration, and never mind whatever customizations you need to make to the front end to match the brand. That's where the eCommerce extension, the extension ecosystem comes in. I've seen way too many stores running out of date versions of extensions because they wanted to make one small change. And so they forked the project, never contributed that back upstream, and just ran with it. I've even fixed bugs in stores that could have been fixed anytime if they just switched over to the community maintained versions of extensions. Yes, there's like a little bit of overhead in getting your changes merged, but in the long run, it's always worth it. There's no reason to like take on the burden of maintaining the extension and upgrading it and doing everything if the community is going to be potentially duplicating that work. I know it's a little subtler of an issue if there's not like a current maintainer for the project, but you're certainly not going to get any more help by forking. Now, I've seen a bunch of times, this is one that always surprises me when I run into it. People see the really cool tooling we have in the community around maintaining extensions and think like, oh, I should build all my custom integrations and stuff as extensions. I recommend against doing that. The workflow of making changes to your extension, validating them, updating your app to the new version of the extension, making sure everything works together, for every single change you need to make to that extension is too much overhead. It's not worth it. If you think you have a good use case for an extension, just keep it in its own namespace, ready for extraction down the road when it stabilizes and you find the time. You probably won't find the time and it won't be worth it anyway, but on the off chance you do find that it's worth extracting, hopefully you've isolated it well enough and it shouldn't be too hard to extract. If it ends up all tied into custom functionality, then it probably wasn't very reusable in the first place. And I've just saved you a ton of work for trying to like make something an extension that shouldn't have been. Now, that's for things that are like really core to your business. If there are plenty of use cases where you actually do want to build an extension. A good example might be that you're building a new store, and as part of building a store, you're integrating with a payment gateway that doesn't have support on Solidus yet, but you intend to open source it later. Something like that. Just build it in the same repo. You can make a folder called gems in your project, put your extension in it, point your gem file at the folder, and then you don't have this multi-repository workflow to update things. You can set up your CI to run tests against your application as well as the extension and make sure everything's integrated properly without any sort of additional workflow overhead there. And then when your functionality stabilizes and you're ready to pull that out to an extension and share it with the community, you can just move that folder into its own repo and update the gem file, and super, super, super easy. So touching again on a little bit on my topic from the last conference, but Rails and Solidus play really nice with both browser driving and unit tests. So get familiar with them and use them. Clark Brunson used to remind us, e-commerce is hard. Well, I'm here telling you, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Write acceptance tests to verify that the core functions of your website are working as intended. Write unit tests to ensure that the individual pieces do what they're supposed to, and write integration tests to ensure that everything fits together properly. How to best test things is a whole other talk, one that I have lots of opinions on. But the important thing is that you have a strategy and that you follow it. It's nearly impossible to keep your site up to date without this kind of safety net. The surface area of e-commerce applications is just too big. And if you're at the scale where you have the resources to have QA personnel, understand they're not a replacement for automated tests. Humans are slower at testing things that automated tests can verify. However, we meat sacks are very good at testing a whole slew of things that computers can't test for us. So if you're offloading QA from your developers, do so by complementing your test suite, not replacing it. Teams that lean too hard on just having QA people tend to it slows down that feedback loop so much. It's really sometimes painful working in those kinds of organizations. So we touched earlier on how Solidus allows you to modify everything. And that's one of the reasons why Solidus is so great. But the more you modify, the more custom stuff you have to maintain. And so you just need to make sure that the modifications you're making are meaningful and worthwhile. So you don't just go modifying everything to suit your every whim. Now, this doesn't apply so much to configurable classes. If you want to create your own price selector to handle the particular form of bulk pricing that you need for your store, knock yourself out. Awesome. That's what the those configuration options are there for, and they work great. I strongly recommend getting familiar with the various configurable classes and using them. As an aside, I really like that pattern. If we look at the price selector stuff or the tax calculation stuff, both have enabled really much cleaner ways to do some common kinds of configuration or customizations. And I think we can definitely benefit from more of that in Solidus in the future. So there are two main ways of changing views in Solidus, or templates in general. You can use deface overrides, or you can place a template at the same path in your applications app view folder. And it'll take precedence over whatever's in Solidus or any extension or engine you use. I have a couple tips about when to use each and how to use them. If you're modifying the front end of your store, don't use deface. Just override the templates. It's your storefront. It's probably the most customized part of your whole store. It makes sense for you to just own that code going forward. If you're modifying the back end, on the other hand, try to lean on deface overrides. Deface is a hilarious hack. For those that have never looked under the hood at what deface does, it converts your templates to XML, like converting the actual ERB in them to XML, performs the transformations on that, and then converts it back into ERB, and then it gets run. Kind of terrifying to see how the sausage is made there, but it does its job. And it allows different extensions to target specific parts of the admin in your application and make their necessary modifications, largely without interfering with each other too. Don't risk breaking that by overriding things or like whole templates unnecessarily, and you need to maintain all those data hooks and everything, and it's easier moving forward if you don't do that. When you're using deface to modify the admin, I personally like to write browser driving acceptance specs that just sort of check that the fields and content are where they need to be, just really lightweight ones. This ensures that as you're going through upgrades and things that you don't lose any overrides because something changed upstream in the template that you're modifying. If you can't reasonably use deface to make your change, you're going to have to copy the admin template into your app and modify it. there is a best practice here. I don't know if this is documented anywhere, but I always tell people to do this. Copy the template in as it exists in Solidus at the moment that you want to modify it, and commit that, then make your change and commit your change. So this gives you a record of what the template was and what you did to it. So if the template changes upstream in Solidus, you have this record, you can take the new template, look at what the change you're supposed to make is, reconcile those changes really, really easily. This one, if you don't have that, it's like you gotta go figure out what changed, and you're not going to want to do that, and you're going to miss things. And no, just commit it as is first. Now, if you need to modify like core behavior of Solidus, and there's not an extension point for you to hook into, this is where you get into modifying core classes directly. Historically, class eval was the tool for this, but we don't use class eval anymore. No more class eval. My general recommendation is to just use module prepend everywhere. Technically, for some use cases where you're making additive changes, you could just use include, but I think it's simpler to just use prepend. There's even support for prepend in active support concerns now. So if you want to make all of your decorators, or as we're moving to calling them overrides. Rails has for a long time called them overrides, and we've got a little bit of a naming clash between deface overrides and our modification, the overrides that are modifying Solidus classes, but we're working on that. Just be careful that you're in a new enough version of Rails that you have the active support concern support for prepend. And when you're making these modifications, you need to write tests. You're adopting the whole surface area of the API of the object that you're modifying, both public and private. And while this is extremely powerful, it's also like the most brittle way you could modify those things. We on core try to not make too much churn in the project to avoid just breaking things, breaking modifications that do this unnecessarily. But the reality is we also need to move the project forward and make changes. So just make sure you write tests to ensure that the classes still do what you need them to do. At the end of the day, it's up to you to make the most of Solidus's customizability. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by trying to completely rework a system just to make a minor change to the behavior because you prefer some different design. This is kind of unintuitive, especially if you come from a aggressive refactoring agile discipline where you're expected to make the system structure reflect its behavior at every step of the way. You want to be a little more targeted when you're making modifications to code that you don't own. I mean, most programming languages don't even let you do that. So, and there's reasons for that, but that flexibility is something that really lends a lot of power to Solidus in the niche that it's found. So where you need to make changes, just do so carefully and safely, and make sure to document those changes. So one of the reasons that Solidus exists is because at the time when we forked, upgrading Spree was brutal. Now, I would assume they're doing better these days. The projects have diverged such that I don't keep up with what's going on in the Spree community, and it's managed by totally different people now with who are more focused on the platform itself. But back then, in the like 1.x, 2.x days, it was a serious issue. Major and minor versions alike introduced all kinds of incompatibilities, sometimes reworking entire systems in minor releases, breaking tons of things. There was no system of deprecations like we have now, so you couldn't even prepare for those changes in any meaningful way. And additionally, some of the versions would also require that you upgrade Rails at the same time as you were upgrading Solidus. So you're trying to bump application logic and manage that against your framework changing, and you got to deploy them all at the same time. And this led to a situation where we were unable to recommend that many of our clients upgrade, which quite frankly sucked. This led to fragmenting in the community because individual stores were all just running arbitrary versions and were forced to often maintain their forks of those versions to keep up with security and other dependency issues, and just placed way too much burden on individual organizations. With Solidus, we aim to fix that, and I largely think we did. Well, upgrading spree stores in the like 1.x and 2.x days sometimes took months. I've seen Solidus upgrades typically take a day or two in my experience. If you're keeping up with deprecations, even major versions are no more than a few days. In the winter of 2017, we really, well, John Hawthorne, who was the full-time maintainer at that point, released a bunch of security patches that he'd been working on. And when we found when he found those vulnerabilities, which were they'd existed in Spree for quite a while, and we had to work with them to make sure they addressed them as well. We found that he was forced to release 10 versions of Solidus for every version bump, because we were maintaining security patches for every version we'd released at that point. That was a lot of work, especially due to the minor differences across all of those versions. And I wasn't part of that discussion, but he and Core realized that they needed a security policy, that we couldn't just support every version of Solidus ever. And this made sense. If we're making it this easy to upgrade, then it's not unreasonable to expect stores to upgrade at some reasonable pace. So currently, minor versions of Solidus receive security patches for 18 months. That's our official policy. We often also include instructions for how to apply like a hot fix to your application if you can't upgrade, so that you're not vulnerable when anything happens. This is a pretty wide window in the grand scheme of things, considering you also have things like Rails and all of your other dependencies have their own security policies around this kind of thing. So at minimum, you need to upgrade Solidus every year and a half to just avoid the unnecessary security risks. So I'm sure everyone's figured this out. I'm a big Agile proponent, and a big idea behind Agile is just about tightening feedback loops. It's why we don't do waterfall, because in any dynamic business or startup, e-commerce or otherwise, you want to be adjusting your core space as you learn more about your product or your customer base or the world around you or the code you've written. You just you need that level of agility to be an effective software team. Upgrades themselves are a kind of feedback. We talked about not going overboard, just modifying everything. Well, upgrades can highlight the ways that your modifications might be brittle. Tests might break, you'll work to fix them, and that you might learn about what is and is not a safe way to modify the system. And this really applies to all dependencies. It's not necessarily just how you modify Solidus, but how you integrate with really any dependency that your application has. These kinds of upgrades are an opportunity to evaluate your design, whether you've isolated the interactions with your dependencies sufficiently, whether you've tested things appropriately to both identify the changes and make the adjustments that you need to make relatively painless. This is a good kind of pain. It is an informative kind of pain. And as you go through the regular upgrades, you'll just find that the upgrades get easier and easier. If you push them all off and do a ton of them at once, it can be very painful. I've done that. I've upgraded stores from like Solidus 2.2 straight to, from Spree 2.2 to like Solidus 2.1 or something crazy like that. Or don't do that. It's so much work. So those are the benefits of upgrading regularly, which is the minimum that you need to do. Now, if you want to make the most of the platform, you need to just be on the latest version always. Now, that doesn't mean like the latest master on GitHub, but at least the latest minor release. If you're not, you don't actually have the option of upstreaming changes to Solidus and then using them. If you're 3 versions out of date, you can PR your improvements to Solidus that your store wants to use. But we mostly only backport bug fixes and security patches to previous versions. So you're going to have to wait till you upgrade to see those improvements. This is potentially one of the more important aspects of making the most of Solidus. The fragmentation that we saw across versions in the Spree ecosystem it meant that stores couldn't benefit from upstreaming improvements to the platform. So they would make them in their own apps or make them in their own forks and just never share them. Instead, you need to take advantage of the open source nature of Solidus. It's one of those benefits. I didn't really talk about it back there, but it's there. The stores that stay up to date have the most opportunity to shape the direction of the platform to suit their needs. To put it in like maybe a little more concrete terms, we can bring it back to those configurable classes. If you need to make a customization to a core class, and you're running the very latest version of Solidus, you have the option to go ahead and make a PR to add an extension point so that you can use it, and then do a tiny potentially patch level upgrade if we can, or at least a minor one if we can do it in a non-breaking way, and sidestep any risks of decorating core classes. Finally, we're going to talk about community. So Solidus is more than just an open source project. It's a community. There are lots of ways to get involved. You can contribute to open source, the open source side of things. You can get involved, in the stakeholders team if your organization's adopting Solidus. But the first way, just join the Slack. It's a great place to connect with people who are using Solidus and learn more about what the community is up to. And GitHub discussions is a great place to ask questions and get help. It has the advantages over Slack that people Googling for answers are actually able to find those conversations that have been had, which isn't the case with Slack. So I really encourage anyone who's having trouble troubleshooting anything to go head over to GitHub discussions. I personally prioritize those. I always see them. Sometimes I ask people on my team to go look into things if people have questions, and I think someone on my team knows the answers to them. Come to the meetups. We've not hosted one for a while, but I'm sure we've not seen the last of them. Keep an eye on Slack for when we're hosting the next one. So let's recap here. Find your reason for using Solidus and make the most of it. Lean on agile principles to get your store live with minimal development waste. Focus on the outcomes, not hot technologies. Make conservative infrastructure choices. Embrace Rails. Make use of extensions and contribute back to them. Don't worry about building extensions until the functionality is sufficiently stable and you're sure it's worth pulling out. Write tests, and then write more tests. Use extension points or module prepend if you need to, but only make the changes that you need. Customize the storefront all you want by overriding views and anything else, but use deface and admin for the admin as much as possible. Upgrade Solidus. This one may be the most important one, because since you're upgraded, you can influence the direction of the platform to suit your project and organization's needs. And finally, embrace the community, because we're all in this together. So again, my name's Jared. I'm on Twitter as Jardo Namaron, because for some reason one time my bank printed Jardo on my checks, and everyone thought that was really funny. On GitHub, I'm Jared Norman. If you're looking for what we do at Supergood, you can head over to supergood.software. We'll actually be launching a new site sometime next month with case studies and that kind of thing about all the kind of work we've been doing lately. And And anywhere you find this grumpy picture of me on the internet, it's me. I'm not actually grumpy, so please come find me between talks and over on Slack, reach out on Twitter. I'm always happy to help with things, chat with anyone about anything Solidus. Thank you.